Spoiler warning for Ugly, first proposed in 2023, solved in 2024.
That, kids, is the ending of Ugly. And that caps off one of the grimmest stories I've ever had told to me in a video game. As goofy as this final scene is, it was not only fitting, but completely necessary. It was the final release of a pressure valve. Ugly is a puzzle platformer game with a story self-described as dark, but that word is hardly sufficient. The acts of the antagonist are a periodic table of cruelty. It is, however, so narratively dense and so mechanically brilliant that it is nothing short of a masterpiece. Seriously, how is this game so under-reviewed? What the hell, puzzle gamers? What were we all doing back in September? Welcome instead to Chants of Sennaar. Oh, okay, yeah, I remember that now. So what I'm saying is I recommend this game wholeheartedly, but if dark themes and violent plots are too much for you to handle, you should probably give it a pass. Trigger warnings for everything. But if you're willing to dive in, you are not going to be disappointed. You wake up on a dirty mattress in the basement of a collapsing mansion. Your only companion is about 10,000 empty wine bottles. Those and the broken shard of a mirror. Welcome to the game of reflections. This mirror is our primary puzzle mechanic and will be used from your first steps to the final act. Its use is natural and intuitive, a great quality to have in any game mechanic, but especially good for puzzle platformers as precision and timing are often part of their solutions. Think of the mirror as an axis of symmetry. Whatever you do on one side of the white line, your reflection mirrors on the other. You'll realize that while you have substance and collide with obstacles, your reflection does not. Like a ghost, it can pass through walls. How cool is that, huh? As somber and horrifying as this game is, its mechanic is so much fun to use. The first puzzle is very simple. Position yourself near the left wall and swap. The player will land on a scaffold which promptly collapses. No worries though. Immediately after, you learn to recall the mirror at will. So you can use the mirror to place an axis, use it to reach a new location, then use it again to place a different axis. Ugly's traversal in a nutshell. And you'll need that to navigate a mansion in obvious disrepair. Floors, ceilings, and walls are all vulnerable to collapse. That leads to the game's second main mechanic, the reset. It's possible to get stuck with no way out. Some puzzles will deliberately try to trap you. Our main character solves these problems the way he's been solving all his problems. Normally a simple reset button wouldn't be worth noting, but given how tied Ugly's mechanics are to its story, it needs to be mentioned. The mirror has one more trick. In certain rooms, you'll find two drawings of a child. Place your reflection on one while you stand on the other, and you'll get one of these. This is the primary way the backstory of Ugly is told. There are 26 of these memories scattered throughout the mansion. Only a few are hidden, and only one is required. You're never going to like what you find, but you're not alone in that. Our main character doesn't seem to like them either. Well, that's all the mechanics. Let's head upstairs. Now, Ugly's structure is kind of a funny thing. The mansion is split into 5 wings. Each wing has a mechanical focus. So for all intents and purposes, the front hall is a hub world. Learning how different mechanics work enable you to reach the other doors. This should mean that returning players could take an entirely different route than first-time players, but alas, that's not the case. Only the butterfly wing is open at the start, and all the other doors are locked with keys that can only be found in the preceding wing. Sorry, speedrunners, but progression through Ugly is very linear. But not completely linear. Even though the order of the wings is set up, the order within the wings is up for grabs, so there's still some room for optimization. Now, if you've played Portal, you know that 80% of the game is tutorial. You just don't notice because no one is giving you specific directions. The butterfly wing is like that. What's taught here is not new mechanics, but rather how to think with mirrors. We've been given a versatile tool, and here's what we learn what it can do. Take this level. The player needs to cross from one side of the room to the other, but it's too far for your reflection to reach. There's a moving platform, but it will only take you halfway. The answer is pretty simple, but it has a cool factor that gets repeated multiple times through Ugly. Put your mirror on the platform, then jump back to the starting place. As the mirror rides the platform, the distance between yourself and the reflection grows at twice the speed. That's way more than enough distance to cross the gap. Floor 1 is all about proficiency. It's not really teaching you anything new, it's just putting it in your mind that you might be capable of more than you think you are, and reinforcing that through problem solving. Fitting for the first game, the butterfly wing is a child's wing. Nobility, am I right? And this is also where we start to see the characters and dynamics we're working with. If you've been paying close attention so far, you'll have noticed a motif. It's first seen in the basement, but reappears throughout the mansion. Proper names are never given, but families in this game are identified with animal crests, and for this family, that crest is the scorpion. Looking at our first clutch of memories, we're introduced to 3 figures. The most prominent is this man in red. This is Father, the lord, prince, and head of the household. His business seems to be wine, as the casks bear his mark. And it only takes one memory to see that this is going to be the villain of the story. The woman in green is Mother. We are going to like her while she lasts. The last figure, the one in blue, is the sun. Remember that we're viewing a world that has fallen apart. The events happened long enough ago for rot to set in, but strangely not long enough for an orangutan to starve. I told you this would get bad. So everything we see was put into place well before the player arrives, and the most prominent feature of the butterfly wing are the sun's chalk drawings. They're present throughout the mansion, but most prominent here, and they make his feelings on the family dynamic very clear. If it wasn't obvious, Mother's family crest is the spider, and this child liberally decorates his rooms with images of spiders and scorpions in constant conflict. Unlike your average child, the son doesn't fear spiders, but elevates them to the position of magical guardians. His own self-symbol is the butterfly, most often drawn as being in a cage. See, here's the thing. Father is a narcissist, to a pathological degree. He sees himself as divinely beautiful, and his progeny must reflect that. His son does not. Also, this isn't an eye of the beholder situation. The game canonically declares that the son is ugly as could be, but also that he's bright, kind, and is loved by his mother and the household staff. But for Father, only one thing could make his son acceptable. We've spent enough time in the butterfly wing. Time to move on. Oh, that. Don't worry about it. The flower wing is a sort of utility wing. There are lots of different rooms here. An armory, a clock tower, a bar, everything one might need to either equip, maintain, or entertain. This is also where the first external mechanic is thrown our way. I said that there was only one way for the son to become palatable to Father's sensibilities, and that was if he couldn't be seen at all. The mechanic for the flower wing is paint. This paint is splashed liberally throughout the wing. Wherever there is paint, the player's reflection doesn't appear. It isn't obstructed, and you can place a mirror in it, you just can't swap into it. So a painted room can be used as a starting point, but never an ending point. Puzzles in the flower wing are about removing some of that freedom you felt in the butterfly wing. Obvious solutions are blocked off, rooms are split in two, the nature of the paint turns routes into one-way trips that can trap an unwary player who hasn't planned for a way out. This wing shows what it would take for the son to meet Father's standards. Outside the banquet hall, there's a very specific chalk drawing. It shows Father and son both depicted as scorpions. As far as I could find, this is the one and only time the two are depicted as being on the same side, of having anything close to a friendly relationship. And the memory within shows why. There was a brief period of time when the son and the father reached a compromise, and that compromise was a golden mask to hide the son's face. With that on, Father was not only willing to let him be seen, but be seen among his peers in society. It was the only time he received anything close to his father's acknowledgement. It was a solution, and one that garnered rewards from a child who had only ever known his father's rejection. But the theme of the flower wing is denial, hiding the truth, and the constant reminder that Father only cared for him when he couldn't see him. But for that moment, the son was willing to be the father's reflection. So what about this one? Should we talk about this thing? Sure. Ugly is one of those puzzle games that uses boss battles. Boss fights in puzzle games are a weird thing. They're meant to be a test of either skill or strategy against an opposing force. But puzzles rarely have a truly opposing force, the difficulty being in their comprehension, so how does one apply pressure to the act of understanding? In Ugly's case, it asks you to do everything at speed, with wildly inconsistent results. There are 6 bosses in Ugly. The first one was the Bandaged. This one is the Covering. All the bosses test the mechanic you learned on their respective floor, but like I said, it's not well balanced. The Bandaged and the Gatekeeper barely put up a fight, meanwhile the Poisoned and the Glass are exercises in frustration if you mess up once. The Covering might be the most balanced boss in Ugly, but that's because instead of playing like a puzzle platformer, it skews more towards a precision platformer. What you'll almost never have to do in this fight, or in most of them for that matter, is think about them. That said, like everything else in Ugly, the bosses are reflections, so we haven't seen the last of them just yet. And the next wing is the Spiders. The first thing you might feel on entering this wing is how serene it is. Coming hot off the escape from the Covering, this is a breath of fresh air. Literally in one puzzle's case. The background music is also the most peaceful in the entire game. It almost feels like a respite. Which, if you're a frequent video game player, is not how one usually experiences spider-themed levels. The centerpiece of the wing is a stained glass window alternating an image of a flower with a spider. Given how spiders eat pests that can threaten flowers, it turns our attention from what we would usually focus on, apex predator, to something more nurturing. The spider wing is rife with flowers and plants despite the recent neglect. It might have been a sanctuary, a place both mother and son retreated to. Some of the decorations, the memory in the costume shop, and the fact that father's face is often covered, indicate that scorpions and their poisonous behavior were actively resisted in this place. Yet there is something painful here, and it deals with the wing's mechanic. So these are glass shards, and they have a very special function. These are the only things in the world your reflection will collide with. When it does, it offsets its position relative to yours. So with judicious use, a player can move their reflection closer, farther, above, or below. Spiderwing levels have features designed to take advantage of this. Some will require you to shorten or lengthen your offset. Others might keep the player confined to one location reliant on their reflection to do the exploring. It's got a remote control platforming feel to it. But there's something funny about the interactions with these glass shards. After touching one, your reflection flickers and distorts as if damaged. Mechanically speaking, this is unnecessary. A visual reminder that your clone's location has changed isn't needed when the puzzle revolves around that manipulation. It's more like the reflection is being hurt by the shards. Here's an interesting factoid. In multiple places, the game will display representations of father and mother symmetrically. While the scorpion remains most prevalent, decor is placed which should establish the house as jointly under scorpion and spider rule. And spiders are just as predatory and venomous as scorpions are. In the list of memories, mother is in less than half of them, and the reason is very clear. 3 of those memories are about father attempting to force the golden mask on his son. The worst is a drunken rage that costs mother an eye. But there's a room in the spider wing which indicates that mother is not weak, not afraid, and not unprepared for this possibility. There's no other way to describe it. This is a training room, complete with weapons, targets, dummies, punching bags, and blood on the walls. In fact, there is blood on the glass shards, suggesting they are more than just a metaphor. There are no chalk doodles in here. The son never saw this room and so never knew what his mother was prepared to do. Between a woman training to fight for her and her child's life and a drunkard who lazes his time away, there's not a doubt in my mind that in a fair fight, Spider would have eaten Scorpion that day. But this is, ultimately, the Scorpion's house. There's only so many people one woman can take on at once, no matter how far she's willing to go. This room was once covered floor to ceiling by mirrored glass. Someone really didn't like this room. Maybe there's a reason reflecting on it hurts so much. There is one other room of note in the spider wing, but we'll come back to it later, when it's ready. If it wasn't clear, the birth of the sun was the start of a war that ruined lives. The next section of the game is the cage wing, and for lack of a better term, this is where the help lived. The thing is, by this point, the war is essentially won. Mother is now the second casualty. Yes, second, we're not talking about what happened to the dog, and with the spider gone, the scorpion commands the field. First and foremost, the son is disabused of any foolish notions of beauty. The mask finally goes on, and so father can turn his attention to other matters. Like, for example, the question of siring a proper heir, one that reflects him, one he can show to the public without a disguise. But is it worth the risk? To marry would be to once again share dominion of his house. What if he ended up with another spider, maybe a deadlier one? If only there was some willing, or at least naive woman who was already under his power. If only there were 4 of them. The cage wing doesn't have its own mechanic. Instead, it gives you an insight into the mirror's capabilities, one you may have already figured out if you took the time to experiment. I didn't. Who here is familiar with momentum preservation? This is, as far as I know, a completely video game related topic, as I've only ever seen it applied in situations where the laws of physics are a matter of opinion. In Portal, it's described by GLaDOS as
speedy thing goes in, speedy thing comes out.
Basically, the player uses their own fall speed as fuel for increasingly high jumps. You don't even need much space to do it, just a horizontal axis over an empty region. Time it right, and when you swap, the momentum is preserved, turning a sudden impact with the floor into a skyward leap. Puzzles here require you to reach great heights, often by maximizing the use of small spaces. Unlike the preceding wings, the cage wing focuses on use of the horizontal axis. Once you can use it, it changes how you navigate the mansion as a whole. The cage wing is where we learn that mother and son are not the only victims. For someone with unlimited power and a completely self-righteous mindset, there is no life, no dignity, no innocence that cannot be claimed in the name of their agenda. But like any occupied territory, even one heavy with collaborators, there are those who resist. Meet Young Maid. I told you no one gets a proper name. She's lucky to get a descriptor at all. Look at poor Green Maid. That's not even her descriptor, I just have nothing else to call her. During his brief period of acceptance, the young maid was willing to befriend the son, to make him feel human, and wanted, and loved, enough that he felt comfortable taking his mask off around her. Even the most hateful being cannot quash love entirely, and hurt someone who is loved, and you will earn the anger of those who love them. It is a wise man who fears the fury of a gentle heart. Also, part of the cage wing leads to a mine where crystals used in the construction of mirrors are found. In the entryway is what looks like a hidden Christian shrine complete with cross, altar, stole, and icons. This will stick like a burr in my brain because we've already seen the dominant religion of the land. Let's call it the Scorpion Faith. It has its own symbols, appears to worship its own leaders, including Father, and its own clergy who dress a bit like clansmen who mixed up their laundry. Having such a shrine in a house so dedicated to the Scorpion would be a dangerous act of defiance, well illustrated by the fates of 2 staff members found inside. And given that these developers are from Spain, not far from the developers of Blasphemous, who they follow on Twitter, by the way, I don't think that's an unreasonable interpretation. There are 2 kinds of people living in the cage wing, those who know they are prisoners, and those who still think their service is going to be rewarded. And for people living in a cage, what better mechanic than one which allows you to fly? Something I realized, looking back over the footage from my playthrough, is how prominent the scorpion motif is in Father's wing. In its own wing, the spider is in places where it's visible, but not intrusive. In the Scorpion wing, there are 2 stone statues taller than the player, a golden embossed crest in the center, and inverted hooks reminiscent of scorpion tails on everything. And you know what's missing here? Any trace of the chalk drawings that provided context to the rest of the house. The son never went into these rooms willingly. This is not a place for children, which is obvious as you see what kind of rooms Father has. Why do the eyes follow me? But maybe it would be better to say this is a place where room wasn't made for children. The first memory, chronologically, is also the earliest narrative use of reflection, and there are 2. Father reflected against himself, and Father reflected against Mother. The name of this memory is, "You are so beautiful. I love you." There is only space in this wing for that which pleases Father. Or for hobbies, I guess. The wing's mechanic, these boxes marked with pentacles, is also unique. Just like you, they form reflections across the mirror's axis. That room back there, it's actually one of my favorite puzzles because the whole thing has to be done through reflections. You never push or pull or even enter the space. You can enter it, but since the surrounding area is painted, you have no way of getting out again. It's a clever and fun use of the mechanic. Puzzles here are a natural evolution of what we've already done. Everything that we can do, the box can do, and so we are charged with manipulating two reflections at once. Truth is, there isn't much here we didn't already know. We knew Father was a narcissist. We knew he was cruel. We knew he was hedonistic. We knew the thing he cared for most was himself. It's a little surprising to learn he had a scorpion-shaped throne from which he felled court, but it's not the weirdest thing in his wing. What we didn't know was that all of the vanity, all of the cruelty, the complete lack of empathy, was only scratching the surface. This wing doesn't have a name. Let's call it the... God, I don't even know. Maybe Secret Wing is the best name. Father is powerful and influential. There's very little he can't do, but a monster has to keep his skeletons hidden if he cares to pass for human. And Father does want that. He wants his secrets hidden from the world at large. This wing is where he buries the bones. This is not a metaphor. This is where the maids finally fulfill their purpose and get their reward. This is where his heirs, disappointing him yet again, are disposed of before anyone can see them. This is where the problem of the mask is conclusively solved. This is the heart of darkness, the true reflection of Father's soul. What's really distressing about this area, aside from everything, is the lack of background music. It's replaced with discordant strings, interrupted by whispering voices that might be begging, or might be warning, or might be choking. I was reminded of Fear and Hunger's depths, the sense that I'd gone too deep, that this wasn't a place anyone should be disturbing, that everything in these rooms would be better off buried and forgotten. But that isn't how this works, because despite having uncovered the secrets, witnessed the last sins, exhumed the bodies, we're still trapped in this rotting carcass of a mansion. So where are we supposed to go from here? We're at the bottom. What other way can we go? We finally have the key to the center door of the hall, a door I had by this point honestly forgotten about, and it took me a bit too long to realize what I was missing. There is no puzzle solving to be done here. Just go upstairs. It's a long stairwell, decorated in dozens of shattered mirrors and topped with a bunch of totally normal things you'd find in any household. And through the last door is an empty, charred, completely burned out function hall, and a mirror with one missing piece. I didn't actually believe it at first, and spent a few minutes on the Steam discussion pages making sure I'd gotten this right, but yes, it's true. We're not Father's son looking back over his history of trauma and abuse. We are Father. These were our sins. All this anger and spite we've built up towards Father is now redirected to us. Consider what's happening in this scene. Father is celebrating with his friends in society, his fellow upper-class peers and hedonists. He's destroyed the lives of his whole family and most of his staff, but here he is strutting along, glorifying himself and exhorting his peers to glorify him as well. Do they know what's buried beneath his wing? What was burned and may still be smoking? Well, someone does. See, scorpions are all solo hunters, but some spiders are known to work together. Remember that room in the spider wing? Some poisons take a bit longer to brew. What follows is the truth, fully reflected. After being burned and scarred by the flames, Father descends. His good looks, his only true treasure, are marred. He covers every image of himself that still stands with paint. He smashes every mirror, then he locks every door, sealing himself inside where no one can see him. Finally, he wanders the halls in a drunken stupor until he collapses on a dirty mattress in the basement of a collapsing mansion. But that's not where the story ends. Technically speaking, this is an ending to the game. We get a credit roll and everything. If you want to stop here, that's completely fair, but if you've enjoyed this game as much as I have, you're probably down for more. When you wake up this time, the mansion isn't just in disrepair, it's wrong. Certain walls are penetrated with pulsating veins. There's a massive membranous door over the center hall. These are clues to a set of hidden puzzles. There are 12 of them, and they all bear an aesthetic dragged straight out of hell. These rooms are closer to being a genuine boss fight than the actual boss fights. They are unforgiving, a little unfair, and will require you to show your mastery of every mechanic. This maze, for example, requires you to use a wall of ladders, let's not look too closely now, to guide your reflection through glass shards. This one here requires you to time your swaps in a way that lets you fly from one end to another. The only thing I don't like is the new mechanic, namely this gory, bloody stuff. Contact with it prevents you from using the mirror, and if your reflection touches it, it vanishes. I don't actually know what this stuff represents. Maybe guilt, maybe denial, it's hard to say. At the end of each one, you receive a memento of Father's sins, and true to form, each puzzle is a reflection of what that memento symbolizes. For example, Father's whip is found in a room full of chained prisoners. Mother's eye patch is in a room where you can only see half the puzzle. The young maid's dress is found inside a shed, barred from the outside with nail marks on the door. The dog's collar is— I said we're not talking about the dog! But there is something we do need to talk about. Throughout our adventure in the mansion, we've seen our player character react to the memories he sees, and that reaction is horror. A horror he has to suppress. That made sense when we thought this was his son, all grown up, but what does it mean when it's father? Well, the clue is in the mechanic. Each memory has to be viewed from two positions at once. This is Father looking back on his past and, for the first time, seeing how ugly he truly is. The last memento is a hangman's rope, and no sin is attached to it. Or, perhaps more accurately, all sins are attached to it. It's time for the last reflection. It's not clear whether he has healed in the time since the fire, or if his self-perceived ugliness was the result of the Green Maid's poison, or if maybe that small scar was always the only blemish, but even that had been too much for him. Whatever it is, he looks more or less the way he did before the fire. If you put him up on the box and lean against the wall, for the first time the camera pans outside the mansion. It's a bright, clear morning, a universal symbol for new beginnings, for new hope. All we have to do is the same puzzle we did at the start of the game. The mirror is exactly where we left it. Just hop up on the shelf, swap to the reflection, move it through the wall, swap again, and then you're finally free. Free of the mansion, free of the past, free of the world. And they, in turn, are free of you.
This blue devil, here you see, get like nothing but me. I'm only worth to burning hell. Stay away from me.
Well, this is a funny little room all tucked away and hard to reach with no sign directing to it. I wonder why the developers put this here. What the fuck?